I have used those communication skills throughout my career. I can have a conversation with anyone. I'm kind of a Ferris Bueller of talent acquisition in that regard. And I just think that that's something that has to come from having difficult conversations and building that muscle. So that part of communication, I think, is really important. I think that's a bit of a lost art. And so I just encourage, um, particularly younger individuals in talent acquisition and recruiting to really kind of put themselves out there and have some of those courageous conversations, uncomfortable conversations. I think that's helpful.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Johnny Campbell, CEO and co founder of Social Talent. And this week on the podcast, we're talking to Russell Weaver, SVP of Talent Acquisition at Paramount Pictures. I'm, as most of you know, a massive movie buff. Grew up working in a video store for 6-7 years as a teenager. And I'd say prior to maybe 2010, I've seen pretty much every movie Paramount Pictures has put out in depth and obsessed about the movie industry. So to talk to a legend, a leader who literally runs recruiting for one of the companies I've admired since I was 5 years of age is an absolute pleasure. And Russell, as you're going to find out, is an even better pleasure to chat to and listen to. We're going to be talking today about the resurgence of what Russell calls relationship recruiting in an AI world. Russell, you're very welcome to the show. Perhaps you can explain your background, what brought you to Paramount in terms of your history, your career in TA. Are you as much of a lover of the movies as I am? I know you do describe yourself as, I think, the Captain Kirk of talent acquisition, which I do love. You're welcome. Introduce yourself to our audience.
Wonderful, Johnny. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, global head of talent at Paramount. I've been with the organization about 5.5 years. My whole career has really been dedicated to talent acquisition. I've been in the space a little over 30 years. The attraction to Paramount was easy. I was a huge Top Gun fan as a teenager. My father was a military pilot. We lived in an area where we went to a high school that was half military kids and half non-military kids. There was a lot of just enmity between the two populations. And then that movie came out. And it really kind of opened the door to having kind of more of a rethink between the non-military and military brats. And it was really kind of a turning point movie for me in my life. My brother ended up joining the Air Force, became a pilot, probably because of that movie. So when I was a candidate for the opportunity at what was then Viacom CBS, the sequel was about to come out, Top Gun Maverick. And I think that had a huge pull in my attraction and my interest in the organization. Ironically, they didn't release the movie for another 18 months after it was originally scheduled. So I joke with my leadership team that they were just baiting me to kind of get me into the door. But the movie did finally come out. It was everything I had hoped for, and it's been a wonderful journey here at Paramount.
Yeah, actually remind me, I went to see a movie in mid 2020. It was the first movie I'd seen in months because the theaters were closed. I went and there was posters up for Top Gun 2 with the original release date, but it had already been announced that would not be the case. I was like, I need to get my hands on those original posters that, had this old date. That's a geeky I am.
Oh, it's funny.
Uh,
I told the studio president that I needed a screening. I needed a pre-screening. The only reason I came here was to, was largely because of that film. And if they weren't going to release it, at the very least, they could invite me into the studio, give me a private screening, and then release it to the masses months later. He didn't honor that request, but still here, still happy.
so Russell, relationship recruiting, that's our topic today. This is close to your heart. You're passionate about relationship recruiting and, always have been, but in an AI world where much of the conversations of this podcast, don't get me wrong, these days are about automation technology, how technology's going to, infuse into recruiting. But you want to kind of push back against that argument a bit. And that's what relationship recruiting is all about. So walk us through the why and what it is to you, maybe just to define relationship recruiting, give some context to it if you don't mind.
Sure. And if you don't mind, Johnny, I'll inject a story into the conversation that I think is kind of a nice segue into that topic. Um, you had as a guest on your podcast not too long ago, Jeff Bettinger. And I've known Jeff for a number of years. And as I was listening to your exchange with Jeff, it got me thinking to an experience that I had a number of years before. I had probably maybe 10 years into my career. I was contacted by an individual who was trying to help someone who was making a career pivot. They had been in the education system, were looking to break out of that and get into actually recruiting in HR. And asked if I'd be willing to have a conversation with this person. And this wasn't somebody that was applying to one of the jobs at the organization that I represented or whatnot. This was just somebody that wanted to kind of get into recruiting. And I love helping people. It was an easy acceptance to that invitation. Had a great conversation with this particular individual. I gave them some tips and pointers and whatnot that I thought would be helpful. And then got a call from this exact same individual a few weeks later saying that the very next job that they had applied for, they had kind of put some of those, those pointers into practice and had a very successful outcome, had received an offer and was now going to be starting in the recruiting field, and just expressed tremendous gratitude for my willingness to have that conversation with them. And, again, stayed in touch with this individual periodically in the years, following, and would run into him at conferences and whatnot. And fast forward some 15, 20 years later, I was looking to make a change in my career, had found out about an opportunity to lead talent acquisition at an organization called Alcon, medical device company, and found out that the hiring manager was indeed the exact same person that I had helped that many years ago. Had a conversation with this individual, talked about the role, took a lot of time, answered all my questions, was very gracious, and then extended an invitation for me to come on campus, at their work campus, and go through an interview schedule. While during the interview, I was invited into this auditorium, and unbeknownst to me, this same individual had brought the entire HR group together and essentially told this story of wanting to break into recruiting and never really finding the opportunity, and then having this turning point conversation with this guy Russell Weaver, and that it really just changed the course of his career, and that he wanted to give recognition to that same person who was in the auditorium, and to thank him for helping him, and so there was a standing ovation. As a candidate, trust me when I tell you that was an easy close. I was very, very interested in the role at that point, but it was actually Jeff Bettinger, who I had helped those many, many years ago, and that had actually helped me take the position at Alcon. Jeff was also instrumental in me finding out about the opportunity at Paramount. The relationship that I've had with Jeff has truly been a lifelong relationship. And it just, I think, just emphasizes hopefully what we'll be talking about over the next 20, 25 minutes, is that you cannot underestimate the power and the value that comes from building deep personal relationships with every individual that you connect with, whether they're a fit for your role or not. Having those relationships will pay huge dividends, both for you as the recruiting professional, and then certainly as the applicant. And as this particular story goes, you never know where those individuals will end up. And certainly I didn't do that with the intention of hoping that Jeff would help me in my career. But I had story after story of those types of relationships and those types of tender mercies that occur when you take the time to develop kind of that personal investment in the talent that you're attracting and engaging with.
I love that story, Russell. Thank you so much for sharing it. Jeff's a great
Sure.
guy. He did a great podcast with us a few weeks ago. If our listeners haven't listened to it, I recommend you check it out. He's super smart, currently Chief People and Culture Officer and Operations Officer at Hudson RPO, and just an insightful and beautiful man. Russell, when we talk about relationship recruiting, let's just put some context on it. Has relationship recruiting declined in the last while? Is it the same? Is it improving? Why do we have to bring up relationship recruiting at all? Why do we have to put it back on the agenda?
Yeah, it's a great conversation point, Johnny. And I always say that I would suggest that I see it on the decline, largely because I think we see so many examples of technology stepping in and not necessarily replacing recruiters, but certainly taking over and replacing some of the tasks that have traditionally been associated with the recruiting process. And as a result, I think I see more and more recruiters that are becoming more dependent on the technology to handle so many of those tasks, that if you're not careful, it allows recruiters to kind of get into the habit of becoming more transactional. They become more dependent on the technology. They follow a script. They check a box, as opposed to bringing, I think, some of those traditional soft skills to the process, to every unique search. I see less critical judgment. I see less emotional intelligence. I see less relationshiping between recruiter and candidate, either because of the overwhelming number of tasks that are now required in the recruiting process, or the fact that they're spending more time with the technology than they are in building the relationships with the talent that they're trying to engage with.
You mentioned obviously the relationship between the recruiter and the talent, but what other relationships do you think are important for recruiters to develop, foster, and focus on, if any?
Yeah, great question. No, and there are a number. I think historically I've referred to this as the four C's. Obviously you have your candidates. You also have your customers, and that can be the business leaders in the organization that you support, the hiring managers that you're working with. Um, you also have customers. Some of those vendors that you're engaging with, that people like LinkedIn or Seek Out or Social Talent, where you're again, kind of implementing those tools that will help kind of bring better value to your process. And then ultimately you have your colleagues. And, for most recruiters, that's going to be your HR professionals, people in compensation, people in finance, people that help with onboarding. And so you really have to kind of, have a full circle relationship management approach to all of those individuals. Certainly candidates are important, but hiring managers are equally important, business leaders equally important, your HR counterparts. And so most of what we do should be relationship driven, and really trying to understand expectations, making sure that we're aligned on purpose, we're aligned on goals and outcomes. And again, if you fall into that trap of becoming so transactional, you kind of sacrifice that necessary time that has to be spent engaging with the hiring managers, the customers, the colleagues, and the candidates. And I think the outcomes suffer as a result.
If I can kind of draw a thread or weave a thread through some examples here, maybe from other industries, just to kind of frame it for folks, because I've been thinking about this since you mentioned the topic a while ago, Russell. And there are plenty of examples where technology could match two sides of a marketplace together really well, because like recruiting is a two-sided marketplace, or at least two sides, right? You've got candidates, you've got employers, and you try and match them together. And you're right, we have become a bit obsessed with how AI can match those really well, but you can also match, buyers of automobiles to the automobiles. You can match buyers of homes to homes. Technology can exist to do those things, but they are big decisions, big purchases, so to speak, big investments to make in your life, just like your career move for a lot of folks is. I guess if a career move is not a big investment, maybe if you're in an hourly job, you're 21, it's a part-time job, maybe you just need a paycheck. Maybe the investment isn't that big, so technology matching you might be fine. But when it comes to big investments, big decisions, we typically always put a human in there as a trusted broker, someone we have a relationship with. A lot of folks have relationships with their realtor for decades, or the same person they always go to for their automobile and for a recommendation. Like, do you see a thread between those different types of experiences and the importance of relationships?
I do, and I think that I'm going to embarrass myself for a minute. I actually think ChatGPT generated this quote, and it's really stuck with me in the last couple of weeks. And that is that technology can scale efficiency, but only humans can scale trust. And so you talk about these big life changing decisions. And I certainly think making a career decision is one of those. And they want to have transparency, they meaning the candidates. They really want to know what they're getting into. They want to know what the culture is really like. They want to make sure that the value is aligned to their own sense of purpose, and what kind of drives them. And in my humble opinion, that can still best and only best come from a human interaction, talking to somebody at that organization that truly knows that organization, knows what that candidate's going to love about it, some of the things that they're going to get frustrated about, and be able to talk about it in a very, human and empathetic sense, so that candidate can make an informed decision. And don't get me wrong, I think technology can augment that. AI or Chat GPT or some of the bots that are being utilized today. But keep in mind that those are populated with information that's been provided that really is going to try to put that company in the best possible light, as opposed to necessarily some of the authentic conversations that need to happen. Also, when you talk about career drivers, what motivates someone? The motivations that I had in my career were very, very different 10 years ago than they are today. Having someone that's really kind of followed my career, stayed in touch with me, seen how those motivations have evolved and changed over time, and then can be able to align that with the opportunities that they're aware of, either in their own organization or in other organizations, and then have that open conversation. I think it's just that's a differentiator. There's been a number of surveys, and I pay attention to these particularly, more recently. And I think that the latest survey I read saw that 67% of candidates want some level of human interaction and human engagement in their process. If you talk to executive level talent, that kicks above 85%. So it's not to suggest that the technology can't help and can't augment. It certainly can, but they still want to have that human connection. They want to have that moment of vulnerability and transparency to really understand that that organization is going to really meet them where they are, address their current career drivers or motivations or needs. And I think that the talent has told us that that's still best coming from a human interaction as opposed to a chatbot or artificial intelligence.
We haven't addressed it, Russell. I think it's pretty important to do it at this point. You're a big fan of the technology. You are very knowledgeable about what's out there. Just in case our audience gets the wrong impression, you're not sitting here going technology bad, humans good. You really do deeply understand the role of tech. You're a kind of pioneer. You see the future, in my opinion. You look at these things like, you're coming at this from the perspective of someone who absolutely does embrace technology. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, thank you for clarifying. I don't want to leave the impression that I'm trying to go back to the 1800s where we're all, pitchforks and torches. No, I think that artificial intelligence, automation, generative and agentic AI, as we see this evolution continuing to move forward, will play a critical role. It's absolutely essential in what we do in talent acquisition and in many other roles. Um, but I also think that the technology, at least that I'm familiar with and what I'm observing, is an enabler. It's an augmentation, but it is not a replacement or a substitution. And don't get me wrong, I've actually seen wonderful success cases where for high volume, kind of low impact roles, you can actually have artificial intelligence manage an end to end process. And I think that there will continue to be a very, very important place for technology in all areas of talent acquisition. But at the same time, I think we also need to be very careful about losing some of those historical soft skills that were really the bedrock of when I was coming into recruiting. Um, the relationship building, the negotiation, the interpersonal skills when we didn't have all this technology. I remember being a recruiter before the internet, and we would run job advertisements by literally taking out ads in newspapers and magazines and whatnot. And certainly we're not going back to that. But a lot of the soft skills that we were dependent on that were so critical in connecting with talent back then are equally essential today. And what's more, what the candidates are telling us is they're getting inundated with all the technology and the automation. They're finding more anxiety in the application process today than they were 5, 10 years ago. So even though we hope the technology will be an efficiency play and it will help us be faster and hopefully drive more quality, the candidates are also expressing some concern and some anxiety and some stress about the inundation of tech. And they would like to see opportunity to have some human interaction in their process. They still want to be able to have a conversation. It means the world to them when the recruiter picks up the phone and just calls them and says, I got your application. Really excited to introduce you to our process and our organization. Do you have 10, 15 minutes to talk about really what are your career drivers and what's important to you at this stage in your professional development? That speaks volumes to a candidate right now where they're getting bogged down with chats and text messages and emails that are automated. And so I just want to remind recruiters that you really need to bring those soft skills while also being fluent and conversant in AI and the role that technology will increasingly play in what we do end to end.
Russell, I don't know about you, right? But the vast majority of recruiters I speak to, if they're listening in this conversation or somebody else having this conversation, they're nodding their heads going, guys, I get it. Like, I would love to be that relationship recruiter. It's what I want to do. It's why I go into this game. But I've got 45 recs. 20% of my team, my colleagues got laid off. My applicant flow doubled in the last year with all these AI powered applicants. I can barely keep up. I'm supporting 2 extra businesses on top of what I was doing 2 years ago. I'd love to do all this stuff, be a relationship recruiter, but I have so many candidates I'm managing, so many hiring managers. I'm so busy. We use this antiquated ATS system that has 26 steps to try and process someone or disposition somebody. I get it, but I don't have the time. What do you say to that? Do you hear that, by the way, from people in the
Oh,
industry?
sure.
And what do you say to that kind of a recruiter?
Yeah, I'd say for starters, I'd want to have a conversation with the leader of that talent acquisition organization, and encourage them to um, consider a review of their tech stack. I know that you and I have talked previously about, I think one of the biggest challenges facing recruiters today is that 80% of their time is spent on administrative tasks.
Mm.
And you just gave some wonderful examples of them. If you are using an older tech stack, if you're not using some of these AI tools, then you probably aren't taking advantage of some of the automation that does exist to help with interview scheduling, to help with pre-screening and assessment. Um, and again, I think the technology can play a very powerful role. So I would encourage talent acquisition leaders to really kind of review their process and look at what role technology is playing. If 80% of your recruiter's time is being spent in the administrivia of talent acquisition, you're missing an opportunity to drive much more strategic value by shifting the time that your recruiters are spending from administrative tasks to relationship recruiting. And so again, to those recruiters that are struggling, the struggle is real, and I get it. And I would encourage them to have conversations with their managers or their leaders about opportunities to look at some of these tools that will help drive automation and help drive some of that efficiency. There are many tools that are out there that are cost effective, so it doesn't have to be a massive drain on your budget. And I think that you just take small steps, and you will find ways to kind of bring back some of that time that you've spent historically in administrative, mundane, repetitive tasks to be able to focus more on that relationship development. But at the same time, I would also encourage a review of really what are those soft skills that are essential. What are the skills that I need to possess to really be able to engage with talent if I do have that opportunity? How do I better negotiate? How do I, bring more empathy to my conversations? Um, I don't assume that that's just an innate ability that every recruiter has. It is something that it's a skill. It can be developed. It can be refined. I think a lot of that can be done through role play. And I also think that TA leaders have an opportunity to demonstrate through example, to be able to show, invite some of your more junior recruiters onto a call where you're engaging with a candidate and talking about career motivators and drivers. Let them see kind of the body of the conversation that you're having with talent, that it's not following a script, that it's not asking the same set of standard questions, but it's really getting to know that individual on a personal level. What's important to them? Why did they make some of the decisions that they've made? How has that kind of brought them full circle to where they are now? And what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for that person? And is there anything in our organization that can align nicely with what those drivers are? I think having recruiters see how that conversation can and should possibly run differently will kind of give them some ideas and some coaching, and maybe they'll start to infuse that into their interviews going forward. So I think it's a combination of really trying to drive more time management, which is really a top-down decision from leaders and managers, but then also for the junior recruiters, really thinking about what skills are important and where they can go to get either training or orientation or the development of those skills.
So, what are some of the top skills? Like you mentioned a couple of them there, Russell, but if you've a list in your head, maybe you do or don't, of skills you say, okay, to be a relationship recruiter, it starts with the following five or the following seven things. What would those top skills be, and explain them and how they connect together, in your opinion?
Yeah, sure. And I'm gonna embarrass you slightly, Johnny. You did a wonderful training in social talent on ChatGPT for recruiters, and in that you used several examples of how you can think out of the box to really kind of get more fluent about a particular division in an organization or a particular company or the competitive landscape. So I would start with intellectual curiosity. I just think that that is the most important thing for a recruiter. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to be kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. They've asked me to lean into divisions that I was unfamiliar with, to recruit for roles that I had never even heard of before. And so technology has a way of empowering you, of enabling you, of educating you very, very quickly. And ChatGPT is a wonderful example of that. But you have to have the curiosity to start to generate the questions that will get you the information you need to be able to know your organization, to know your division, to know the high performing talent within that organization. And so I think intellectual curiosity is a big one for me. I would also say empathy and vulnerability, which are probably not skills that you often see in a competency or behavior model, but your ability to be vulnerable, to be transparent in interpersonal communications, whether it be a phone conversation, a face to face. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I remember how a lot of my communication skills were formed in church dances when I was a teenager, when you're in this big gymnasium. And if you wanted to ask that girl to dance, you had to put yourself out there, be vulnerable, walk across the room in front of all of your peers and make an introduction and ask that person to dance. You didn't have a mobile phone, you didn't have text. Um, and I learned vulnerability from that point. And then as a missionary in South America, in a different language and in a different culture, having to do something very similar to talk about kind of uncomfortable topics. And so I have used those communication skills throughout my career. I can have a conversation with anyone. I'm kind of a Ferris Bueller of talent acquisition in that regard. And I just think that that's something that has to come from having difficult conversations and building that muscle. So that part of communication, I think, is really important. I think that's a bit of a lost art. And so I just encourage, um, particularly younger individuals in talent acquisition and recruiting to really kind of put themselves out there and have some of those courageous conversations, uncomfortable conversations. I think that's helpful. And then I can't um, have a conversation about critical skills in recruiting without talking about judgment. I think having strong emotional intelligence and sound judgment is really, really important. You don't follow a script. Personalize the questions based on your understanding of the role. Talk to some of the high performers, and really get a sense as to what's great about the job opportunity, what's not so great about the job opportunity, and figure out how to translate that into intelligent conversation, intelligent questions, both situational and behavioral for talent. When you engage with a hiring manager, do your research. Don't show up and not have any idea what they're looking for. Do your homework about the role, about the individual. That judgment, that emotional intelligence is so important for us to kind of flip the script and not be treated as paper pushers or order takers, and really be seen as talent advisors. Show initiative, show motivation, do your homework. And again, I think that requires judgment. And I don't see that with the same level of initiative that I think I've seen in years past. So those are a couple of things that I would point to. And then, as we've talked about, I'm certainly not suggesting don't use the technology. You need to understand technology. You need to be open minded and embracing new technology. If you don't understand the difference between generative and agentic AI, if you don't understand augmentation, if you don't understand automation, if you don't understand artificial intelligence, you're really going to find yourself behind the power curve. And so dedicate some time to doing that learning, to spending time in some of these tools and testing and experimenting. I think those things are important. So those are some of the skills that I would point to. And then again, relationship development is a combination of interpersonal skills and communication, and then certainly effective time management. And so just make sure that you're dedicating some time to create 10-15 minute conversations with high performing talent in the area of the company or the division that you're supporting, and get to know those individuals, find out what makes them tick, find out what their values and behaviors and purpose are, and figure out how you can translate that into the conversations you're having with future talent.
I love, Russell, that you managed to reference another Paramount Pictures movie, Ferris Bueller, in there from the 80s. And you described a time from your growing up that is literally Footloose, another Paramount Pictures movie, in terms of that church dance. You're going to say John Lithgow walked in, bashing a Bible, giving out to you now in 2 seconds
That
of
was
that
that was
movie.
actually my father. So yes, that's a whole nother story though.
Loving the movie references, even if they're not intentional, Russell.
Sure.
I love landing. You need about 4 or 5 core competencies there that I love. That critical thinking. Your curiosity piece you kicked off with makes me think of our recruiting strategy for future recruiters is going around kindergartens, look for the kid going, teacher, why is the tree green? Teacher, why do leaves grow? Teacher, why is the sky whatever? It's like, you're a future recruiter. Are you going to be a successful recruiter? That kind of just natural intuition, or that that sound decision making, or that willingness to open up with somebody and build that trust and honesty. They're actually all really, really good core skills to develop. But when you think about leaders, is there a role for TA leaders in terms of creating spaces for the development of these skills? And I don't just mean like time or investment in coaching or skilling, but also like it was pointed out to me recently, sometimes your KPIs go against this. Like, you might go, let's be advisors, let's be partners, let's build relationships, but you need to deliver 20 fills a month. and they're like, whoa, but partnering might require slowing down. It might require pushing back. It might require, things that are going to mess up my, time to hire metric. I might make better hires, but the things you measure me upon, or the business traditionally measures me on, don't align with that. So when you think about the leader's role, the wider role, TA leaders, what can a TA leader do to create an environment where her or his team are more likely going to develop these skills, push into these areas, and be these type of relationship recruiters?
Yeah, it's I'm reminded of John Vlasulika, who I know is a mutual friend, and he talks about kind of the three pillars of speed, quality, and diversity. And I think really what we're talking about here is the quality play. And I think that if you're a TA leader that recognizes the increasingly important value of relationship recruiting, you're going to have to you're going to have to be willing to reframe your KPIs. You're going to have to probably reprioritize a little bit. Um, and I believe, and I certainly can speak from personal experience, that most leaders are willing to support you in that. If you can help them understand the value in what we're describing here, we're trying to build anchor relationships with the highest performing talent in our industry or our space. In order to do that, we're going to have to bring down a little bit kind of the expected outcomes that we have in terms of recruiting results, in terms of number of hires per recruiter in a finite period of time. But the trade-off will be we will have deeper relationships with the talent that you really care about and being able to attract them and bring them into the organization. To accomplish that, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And you can roll out either a training plan or kind of an approach to how you're going to do this. And also I would encourage, and John, I think would support this, is bring the hiring managers into that process, make them part of the solution. Nobody knows your area of the business better than you do. I want my recruiters to have time with you where we're just having a conversation about what great looks like in this role. As you think back over the last several years on who the best performers were, what made them best? What were the skills or the behaviors that really stood out? Where did they develop those? What role did we play as an organization, either in the training or the opportunity for advancement or whatnot, that made that happen? And in that conversation, we're going to be able to identify some of the things that we do best, probably some of those organizational differentiators that are so critical in having a conversation with great talent. We're going to be able to validate the skills that are important. So these are all still important parts of the process, but we're kind of doing it in a slightly different approach. And we're doing it in a collaborative approach where the hiring manager or the interview panel that are our strongest performers are engaging with those recruiters. And I can't think of a situation where you have an engaged hiring manager that isn't willing to shift, some of their priorities and whatnot to allow for that to happen. I think, like with anything else that's really important in life, you have to make an investment to get a meaningful return. And so, having that conversation that starts with the leadership about we're going to take a different approach, and then kind of creating that time, making them part of the process, making them part of the solution, I think is helpful. And then again, you also need to kind of get your recruiters to buy into this. They need to understand how this is going to benefit them. So if they're worried about, well, my bonus is going to be based on delivering 40 hires as opposed to 30, if you can help them understand, no, we're going to value things a little bit differently. We're going to recognize things a little bit differently. And so these are the things that are most important, and just create an environment where everyone can be bought in to this change, if you will. And I think that's how you win. I also think that there are some really, really powerful tools that will enable you to measure that change management and how you're doing in those efforts. And that can be through a combination of hiring manager feedback, candidate feedback through surveying, feedback from your HR partners and others and whatnot. And then also just kind of engaging with your hiring manager and asking them again about, well, what changes are they seeing in terms of the candidate engagement, in terms of the interview process and experience and whatnot. So I think you do need to do some work on the front end, and again, get some stakeholders to engage in this, to buy into this. But I do think the change is ultimately worth the outcome.
Russell, as we wrap up, is there any room for a non-relationship recruiter in the future, do you think?
Um, sure. And I mean, I think that I don't want to speak ill. I'm familiar with organizations that have literally implemented an end-to-end artificial intelligence based, recruitment process, and have had tremendous success. I think FedEx has done it. 7-Eleven is doing it. Chipotle. So I know that there are examples of where you can have a process that's run end to end by technology with very, very minimal human interaction. with tremendous outcomes, and I'm sure significant cost savings as well. I would argue that the majority of the cases that I'm familiar with are those high volume, low impact type roles. And so I think that there will be an opportunity in that space, and that will probably continue to expand into other types of roles as we move forward. So yes, as far as processes that don't have the relationship element, um, I'm sure they exist, Johnny, but I wouldn't want them in my organization. I want recruiters that understand and are comfortable and capable of making a connection with any talent at any experience level in any background or industry or division, and can sell to value, can sell to purpose, can really kind of identify career drivers. Um, those are the type of recruiters that I'll be able to plug and play in any part of the organization and have confidence that they'll be able to engage with a hiring manager, engage with our HR partners, engage with our business leaders, and then certainly the high performing talent in a way that really positively represents the organization. And so I hope that we don't see too many opportunities where non-relationship recruiters are successful. I just think relationship recruiting is going to continue to be critical across the board.
I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today and sharing that, Russell. And you framed it really nicely. I'm hoping that from this day forward, we call it Russell's relationship recruiting, the 3 R's.
Oh, I hope not.
See if that sticks. But thank you so much for joining us. Maybe one last question, if I can, Russell. What's the movie you're most looking forward to, or show you're most looking forward to that Paramount's releasing over the next few months or later this year?
Oh,
If you have
yeah,
one.
this is a no-brainer. I have a burgeoning bromance with all things Taylor Sheridan. I'm a huge fan of his work and his content. I really, really enjoyed Landman, which was actually filmed here around the Fort Worth area. Really excited about season 2. I think that's going to be coming out later this year. So super excited to see what Taylor does with Billy Bob Thornton's role and that entire cast. It's a phenomenal show.
I would second that. One of my favorite shows this year, written for Billy Bob Thornton, I believe, by Taylor Sheridan. He had him in
Yeah,
mind, and
you're right.
nobody else could play that part. Such fun. Ali Larder as well, who was in Heroes many years ago, a show I loved back in the noughties. Great show. If you haven't checked it out, it's on Paramount today, or you can find it on your local provider. Russell, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your story in relationship recruiting. Hope to have you back soon, and I'll see you in person real soon as well. But thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Johnny. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us as well, folks. Really appreciate you joining to hear about relationship recruiting. Hope that resonated for you as well. I promise no more R's from Russell or myself on relationship recruiting, and it's how it resonates with you as we're still recording. We're done there, but we'll be back next week with another episode of Hiring Excellence, where we have another great leader discussing how they're bringing hiring excellence to their business or this industry. Until then, take care.